A Hanukkah celebration in Sydney, Australia ends in horror with at least 15 dead in a brutal shooting on Bondi Beach. As Israel fights Hamas, the war on Jews has gone global, and now even UNRWA may face terror sanctions as the battlefield shifts. Stay with us. Jerusalem Minute is next. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS, alongside Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS. Alex is actually in the United States, traveling on behalf of JNS. I am here in Gush Etzion, Israel. I want to hear about Alex's trip, in particular, his experience at the Israel Allies Foundation conference several days ago. But first, unfortunately, terrible news out of Sydney, Australia. At least 15 people were gunned down, murdered in a terrorist attack at a Hanukkah event by the local Chabad at Bondi Beach in Sydney, which is a very well-known, popular beach there. So far, we know the identity of one of those who was murdered, Rabbi Eli Schlanger. What I understand, he's actually one of the Chabad rabbis affiliated with the event, one of the organizers. Alex, what are you hearing at this hour?
Well, yeah, awoke here in New York to this horrific news about what happened at this event at Bondi Beach, which is, I believe, it's an iconic beach in Sydney, Australia, and just a Hanukkah event. I saw the scenes. Both I saw videos of the shooters, opening fire on crowds and then being tackled by, I think, very brave individuals, as it seemed like the police did not do very much to take these shooters out. Also saw a video and photos of our friend and colleague Arsen Ostrovsky, who has been in Israel for many years, working on the Israel Legal Forum and other campaigns for the Jewish people. And recently, just a few weeks ago, actually went back to Sydney, Australia, to take a leadership position within the Jewish community there. And he apparently was grazed by a bullet in the head. And you see an interview of him with his whole head bandaged and his face and shirt all covered with blood. Thank God that bullet just grazed him and not anything further. It seemed like almost like a parallel to President Trump just getting grazed by a bullet that came so close to ending his life. But prayers go out to him, his family, Rabbi Schlanger's family, the entire Sydney Jewish community.
And Israeli politicians weighing in right now. I heard on the radio just within the last hour, Foreign Minister Saar basically saying, to paraphrase rather, the writing was on the wall there in Sydney and in Australia because of the policies of the government giving a gift to Hamas, recognizing a so called Palestinian state. We saw images over the last several months of mass rallies, pro Hamas rallies in the streets of Sydney. The foreign minister indicating that unfortunately, it's a horrible, horrible event what happened today, but he's not entirely surprised by what happened.
Well, when you allow chance of globalize the intifada, this is what globalize the intifada means. Intifada is not some kind of like peaceful resistance movement in favor of Palestinian statehood, it was the nonviolent civil resistance. That's not it. Globalize the intifada means this. It means jihad. It means, taking up arms. In the last decades, it means terrorism. And quite frankly, you can say that you expected this in Sydney, Australia. We've seen these same kind of rallies supporting globalizing the Intifada. When you say free Palestine, that means free Palestine from Jews. When you say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That means no Jews between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Not that most people know which river or which sea, but that means ethnic cleansing of Jews from the state of Israel. But this isn't local just to Sydney. We're seeing this all over. I mean, these scenes are reminiscent of what we saw a few years back in Pittsburgh and what we've seen this year in Manchester and in Washington D.C. So this is becoming more and more and more common, and it's hard to understand, where can feel safe in this world. We were attacked in Israel on October 7th. We're continuously attacked by terrorists in Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and and the Jewish communities in New York City and in London and England and Australia and France, they all have what to be concerned about right now because, quite frankly, governments have done very, very little, despite a lot of rhetoric, to stem the tide of anti-Semitism. Because ultimately, you cannot hedge. You cannot like say you're with the Jewish community, but also say you're with the jihadis. It doesn't work. You're either with the jihadis or you're against the jihadis. Israel is on the front lines. The Jewish people and the state of Israel are on the front lines of fighting against Islamic extremism and, quite frankly, also against right wing extremism right now as well. And you're either against the extremism or you're for the extremism. There's no hedging. And the other thing that's important to note is that when it starts with the Jews, it never ends with the Jews. I said that the arson Ostrovsky grazing, is similar to the grazing of President Trump, because what you see is that once you have this kind of violent extremism, it never limits itself only to Jews. Jews are the canary in the coal mine. It starts with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. You see these violent shootings against President Trump. You see a violent, assassination of Charlie Kirk. This is what's happening all around the world, and it's time for people to wake up and get control of their situation, with law enforcement, but also really like condemning and making sure that this kind of rhetoric, that these kind of acts have no place in civil society whatsoever, with the understanding, and people should stand up and say it, that Israel is on the front lines against this kind of extremism, particularly Islamic extremism. And there's no choice but to support the Jewish people in the fight that they're fighting on behalf of all of Western civilization.
Yeah, Alex, we have many enemies around the world, but we also have friends. And I know that's what you experienced this week at the Israel Allies Foundation conference. I saw Senator Ted Cruz actually shared some JNS content or retweeted it there. So, talk about your experience at that event amongst the friends that we do have in this world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the the dichotomy of the world that we live in right now. I was expecting that we are going to open this show talking about the friends that Israel has, particularly in Washington D.C. And instead, you wake up to this shuddering images of what just took place in Sydney, and then we bounce, from friendship to tragedy and enemies. But I was this week in Washington D.C. for a conference of the Israel Allies Foundation. That foundation is run by our good friend Josh Reinstein and his wife Rebecca. What they do as an organization is they create caucuses in parliaments, in the legislative buildings, legislative houses all across the world. I think they have something like over 60 caucuses that they've created in parliaments that are specifically pro Israel caucuses. Now, most of the members of these caucuses are evangelical Christians that are Bible believing, that support the state of Israel. Israel itself has its Israel Allies Caucus that is established in its parliament. It was represented this week at the conference by Gila Gamliel, who's the Minister of Technology, Innovation, and Science. And what they do is that they do interparliamentary work to make sure, in fact, that Israel does have friends in legislatures all across the world, uh, pushing them to accept the IRA definition of anti Semitism and other legislative agenda items that help support the state of Israel. And so when we were in Washington this week, the conference went to Capitol Hill. They met with many Congress members. I believe 12 Congress members addressed the group in the Capitol building. Then there was another meeting in the executive office building of the White House, where the faith advisor to the president, Paula White, and many of her colleagues, including Staff Secretary Will Sharf and Carmine Dillon and Leo Terrell, who work in the Department of Justice, who are fighting against extremism and anti Semitism, all address the group. And, you got the sense that there are true lovers and supporters of Israel and the Jewish people, and more importantly, of God, that are advising the president of the United States and are working to help keep Jews safe, at least in the United States, but not only. They talked about what things that they're doing around the world where um, different faith minorities, including Christians all over the world, are being slaughtered. Nobody cares about them, but apparently the office of the president of the United States does care about it, and they're working on it. So at least there are some good people out there that understand the threats, that understand the fight that we're fighting, and are helping to the extent that we're not doing this all alone.
Alex, looking forward to you coming back this coming week and getting a full update on your trip. At the same time, while you're gone here in Israel, was a special session of Knesset in which Prime Minister Netanyahu was basically summoned by the opposition. And I think it happens or can happen once every 30 days, if I'm not mistaken. But during the meeting, Prime Minister Netanyahu vowing to defeat Hamas, even as Hamas refuses to disarm. Let's check out this video.
איך אמר ח'אלד משעל אתמול? נמשיך בדרכנו ולא נתפרק מנשקנו. אבל אנחנו, על זה אני מתחייב לכם, אנחנו לא נאפשר למרצחי החמאס יותר נכון, להתחמש צבאית ולאיים עלינו מחדש. אנחנו פועלים מדי יום למנוע זאת, והמשימה הזאת תושלם. היא תושלם, כפי שאני אמרתי וכפי שאמר הנשיא טראמפ, היא תושלם או בדרך הקלה או בדרך הקשה.
So you have Khalid Mashal, the head of Hamas, rejecting President Trump's demands that Gaza become demilitarized. Where do we go from here?
Well, like you said, this gathering of the Knesset is a normal gathering. The opposition has the right every 30 days to get 40 signatures and require the prime minister to actually appear in the Knesset. And you see that the prime minister is basically stating that, well, we've known that the war is not over, that the ceasefire was declared. The purpose of the ceasefire was to get back the remaining hostages, was to give a break to all of the reservists that have been serving, many of them over 300 or 350 days plus since October 7th, and also to give time to President Trump for this ceasefire, to proceed into the phase two. But becoming more and more clear that there's a timeline on this, and that if there's no international stabilization force that's going to demilitarize Gaza and disarm Hamas, that it's going to be Israel and the IDF that are going to do that. They're the only ones that can do it. And we've seen, more and more people coming out and stating, like Lindsey Graham and others, stating that there's no Arab force that's going to disarm Hamas. So if the international stabilization force is going to be something along the lines of Egypt, Turkey, and Jordan, like that's not going to be the group that's going to disarm Hamas. To the contrary, those are the parties that actually want to protect Hamas, right? So again, we look at this deal. There was phase one and phase two, and maybe I think we've said it on past shows, but the Qataris they push Hamas to enter into this deal because they want to protect Hamas. They understood that the only way to protect Hamas as an entity and to keep it alive as an entity at that point was to release the hostages. So releasing the hostages was a strategy to protect Hamas. Disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza is not a strategy to protect Hamas. And so there's no way that the Qataris are going to actually do that. Now, what they want to see is Israel withdraw to shallower points within Gaza, ahead of any kind of disarmament. And quite frankly, I just don't think that that's going to happen. So I believe that there is an understanding now between the Netanyahu administration and the Trump administration as to the timeline. And you remember back again, we talked about this previously, to the run up towards Operation Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer, where Israel took out the nuclear facilities in Iran. And at the time, the Trump administration said that they were trying to enter into negotiations with Iran to get them to do this the easy way, right? And back then, we said also it's going to be done the easy way or the hard way. And you hear Netanyahu basically saying the same thing now. This is going to be done the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is, if Hamas just hands their weapons and saying, "Hey, we're disarming," go ahead, demilitarize Gaza. We'll take amnesty. That's the easy way. The hard way is if they continue to double down, if they continue to try to grab more and more control over civilian affairs in Gaza and doing so using force, then Israel's going to go back in. And I think that we're on a countdown right now, and there's an understanding. It's not been announced, how long that is. I have the sense that this is something, around, this point, probably less than 2 month timeline. And we know that the prime minister is going to meet with President Trump in Mar-a-Lago in about 2 weeks. And I would not be surprised to see major understandings reached there, if not major announcements made regarding the final disarmament and defeat of Hamas as a terrorist organization inside Gaza.
Yeah, Alex, that meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, official, I believe, for December 29th. Who knows? Maybe you'll be back in the U.S. covering that. At the same time, you mentioned Senator Lindsey Graham. He actually said he supports Israel actively disarming Hamas, and he spoke to JNS actually this week. Very interesting. He said he'd encourage President Trump to consider joint operations with Israel if we can't do diplomacy to disarm groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, like the U.S. Did with Iran. So I think it's interesting, but I'm kind of uncertain if if he's talking about actually bringing in U.S. troops to into combat. I mean, that's something Israel's always said that we were not interested in, not wanting another country to help defend us, physically putting troops on the ground. What are you hearing about Senator Graham's comments?
Yeah, I mean, Senator Graham has always, been a big supporter of Israel in the sense, he's come to Israel many, many times. At the same time, Senator Lindsey Graham always, talking about the creation of a Palestinian state. And, I've gotten some clarity from people that are close with him, stating that, that he doesn't really support Palestinian Authority or PLO rule over Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, that he understands that Judea and Samaria is Israel proper, but that he understands also that if you have to get to Saudi normalization, that they need to hear about the pathway to Palestinian statehood. So I think that that's really confusing messaging. And quite frankly, I don't, and we've probably talked about this on the show here also, is that, Israel doesn't need uh, Saudi recognition and normalization with Israel if that means the creation of a Palestinian state. In terms of what Lindsey Graham said here, too, I mean, it also sounds confusing. On the one hand, you want to hear that America will support Israeli operations in Gaza to disarm Hamas. At the same time, uh, Israel does not need troops to defeat Hamas in Gaza. That's not what Israel needs. What Israel needs is a green light. What Israel needs is space from the international community, from the United Nations. They need the United States to stand firmly behind Israel in every way without hedging one bit, stating that anybody that opposes what Israel is doing is standing on the wrong side of history and is standing on the wrong side of the United States. That's something that the president of the United States can do, to say that whoever does not support Israel in this is standing on the wrong side of the United States. That is what it will take in order to get countries to tamper down their very public opposition of Israeli operations inside Gaza. So Israel can do this by themselves. They've got the intelligence, they've got the will, they've got the people, and I hope that they have the weapons with the help of the Trump administration. That's another area where President Trump's been very, very helpful. And also understanding that one of the reasons why Israel is short on weapons is because they are so pinpoint precise with all these weapons, that they are, using weapons in the most limited way possible to achieve the lowest amount of what collateral damage on each strike, just making sure that they're using one weapon, per each target, right? So when people talk about, Israel committing a genocide in the Gaza Strip, Israel has used way more weapons, and these are the most sophisticated, heavy, precision guided weapons in the world. They've used more weapons than the number of people that they've killed in Gaza. I think people have to understand the lengths to which Israel goes, to its own detriment, I might add, to avoid civilian casualties and collateral damage. And Israel's lost many soldiers as a result of trying to be this pinpoint careful. So in any case, Israel does not need the help of foreign forces to rid itself of Hamas. Quite frankly, there's only one force in the world that can disarm Hamas, that can defeat Hamas. That's the IDF.
I agree with you there. And Alex, you mentioned precision strikes. I saw the video yesterday evening after Shabbat, Israel taking out Hamas's number two, Ra'ad Sayad, one of the architects of the October 7th massacre, head of the weapons production headquarters under Hamas there in Gaza, their so called military wing. He was taking out, in just unbelievable video. You saw the missile just hit his car with no other collateral damage, just taking him out, which was reported by the IDF after Shabbat yesterday evening.
That's right. Israel is using intelligence, continuing to gather intelligence, and not standing pat. So while there is a ceasefire in place, we have to look at the same type of ceasefire that you have in southern Lebanon. Anytime that Israel sees, terrorist masterminds moving around, organizing, reorganizing, Israel's going to strike. It's not a massive incursion inside the Hamas controlled areas right now. Israel's giving space to President Trump, as we just discussed earlier. But when they have the opportunity to, continue to take out Hamas leadership, they will do that. And it should be noted that Israel has taken out the in- almost the entire top structure of Hamas leadership. So while there are people running around there with guns, it's not the same level of organization that this was before October 7th. It was a very organized group, that had strategies mapped out, that had coordination and communication tools. And right now, what you've got is terrorists running around, that have been recruited since October 7th, running around with guns. It actually brings me to something. I don't know if you were going to bring this up, but we saw like America's envoy to Turkey, and also the special envoy to Syria, Tom Barrack, talking last week at the Doha Forum in Qatar, and he's always been, very negative in his tone towards Israel. And first he said, there's no democracies in the Middle East. Maybe Israel can claim it's a democracy. It was like a backhanded, slap of Israel being the only democracy in the Middle East. We're hyper democracy and we're problematic democracy for many different reasons. But definitely, we have open elections for our prime minister. We have a prime minister who's been here, since 2009 straight, and before that from 96 to 99, because he's elected by the people. And the people that don't like him, they go out and they protest. And we go to elections again. We're going to have elections again next year. I'd like to see Palestinian Authority or the Gazan people or the Syrians, for that matter, have elections and a free press like Israel has. But aside from that, what Tom Barrack said, he said every time Israel kills a terrorist, 10 more, they birth 10 more. And what a disgusting thing to say. That Israel shouldn't kill terrorists because every time they kill a terrorist, they make 10 more terrorists. Absolutely not. Okay. The reason why there are 10 more terrorists born every time that there's a terrorist killed is because the terrorists have been inciting their populations and educating their populations for decades to kill Jews. Okay. And that's the reason why every time you take out a top terrorist, another one pops up out of the woodwork because they've been incited to do that since they were kids. The children in Gaza grew up on Hamas Mickey Mouse and grew up in summer camps where they practiced October 7th attacks against Jews. And there's so many videos of this. All you have to do is go to Palestinian Media Watch and you can see the videos of Gaza summer camps. Like, you cannot make this stuff up. Okay. This is very highly and well documented. And so the idea that Israel should not take out the top leadership of terrorist organizations because some young 18-year-old is going to decide that he wants to be a martyr the next day, absolutely not. Israel's going to continue to target the top leadership, the terrorists, no matter where they are, junior or senior in the hierarchy, and they're going to strike whenever they can in order to remove the capacity of these terror organizations. And if it takes fighting for years and years and years until there's no more terrorist organization, that's what Israel's going to do. And we don't need people like Tom Barrack, whispering in the ears of President Trump and or Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner, and telling them that Israel should not be attacking terrorist organizations.
Yeah, I definitely want to question moral clarity there of Tom Barrack, but at the same time, the Trump administration is considering at this point weighing sanctions against UNRWA, which is basically the human rights so-called arm of Hamas. We've proved time and time again how Hamas and UNRWA are intertwined, but according to this latest report by Reuters, the State Department is considering declaring UNRWA a foreign terrorist organization. And, Israel has been dealing with UNRWA for many, many years. And I think they've come to a point where they are going to throw UNRWA out of Jerusalem if possible, from what I understand. I know there have been talks for many, many years, even before October 7th, about UNRWA's complicity with the terrorists. So we'll have to see what happens there. But I think this is pretty big news here, declaring UNRWA a foreign terrorist organization. And why it's such big news is because it has the letters U and N at the beginning of their name. I think this could be huge.
That's correct. I mean, this is an agency of the United Nations, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. This is the only agency that was created to deal with a singular refugee crisis. Okay. Every other refugee crisis is dealt by a singular agency in the UN, which is not UNRWA. UNRWA was created specifically to deal only with the Palestinians. The Palestinians, by the way, the only refugees that are able to gift so-called refugee status onto their descendants. Okay, so it's not just they said that there were refugees in 1948. By the way, any refugee from 1948 has a home. They're not refugees. What they do is they built cities, and some of these cities are called refugee camps. Now, you and I would not be able to delineate if you walked into one versus another what is not a refugee camp and what is a refugee camp because they're just cities. And then, in addition to that, the so-called refugees confer their refugee status then onto their children, onto their grandchildren, onto their great-grandchildren, to the extent that you have way more refugees today than you did in 1948 when the first so-called refugees were created during the Israeli War of Independence. And not only is UNRWA, perpetuating this false refugee status, which is specifically meant to continually delegitimize the state of Israel, and also to get the international community to flow billions and billions of dollars into Palestinian controlled territories because the Palestinians can't govern or create an economy for themselves that can support themselves, even despite being given so much money to establish that infrastructure over the years. But in addition to that, UNRWA continues to run the school systems or until October 7th is what they were doing, and they still are. They created the textbooks and the education system that is being used to incite violence against Jews. And even after October 7th, Palestinian school kids are still using UNRWA created textbooks. So you've got this problem where this organization, which specifically tries to inflate this refugee crisis that, quite frankly, doesn't even exist or didn't exist until October 7th. Now you've got refugees problem in Gaza. There's a huge refugee crisis because people don't have homes. And guess what? Now, one country in the entire world wants to take in actual Gazan refugees. And they've never wanted to take in any Palestinian refugees because they want those refugees to be a finger in the eye of the Israeli people so that they could continuously delegitimize and demonize Israel for that. Where's the world? The world doesn't care about Palestinian refugees. The world doesn't care about Gazan refugees. Nobody around the world is even opening up their borders to any meaningful number of Palestinian Gazan refugees at all. In the war at Russia Ukraine, how many millions of refugees were there? Even Israel took in 35,000 plus refugees from the Ukraine. Who's taking in 35,000 refugees from Gaza? None. So you've got this organization which claims to be a refugee organization, incites to murder Jews. Okay, that's why you've got 10 new terrorists every time you kill a terror leader inside Gaza or anywhere else. And meanwhile, they're not doing anything to resettle the actual Gazan refugees. So good on President Trump to uh, claim that UNRWA is a terrorist organization. I hope that Israel will take the step to not only expel UNRWA, but to expel the parent organization of UNRWA, which is the United Nations. Okay. Yes, the United Nations is the one that pays for and promotes UNRWA and all the other UN agencies like UNESCO and all the others that operate against Israel all the time. So finally, a little bit of moral clarity, and let's see if the rest of the world will wake up and share the same moral clarity that President Trump and his administration have.
Absolutely. UNRWA keeping people as pawns on the front lines against Israel for the last 77 years and increasing that since October 7th, not letting anyone out. And no countries, of course, as you said, willing to let any of them in. At the same time, just another example here of the fact that there is no daylight between the U.S. administration and Israel. You have U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio meeting with Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar this week, also to talk about Gaza. In addition to that, the House passing a $900 billion defense bill with critical pro Israel provisions. So, a lot of positive news coming out of the U.S. and the leaders in Congress and the administration.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely differences between U.S. policy right now and Israeli policy. Certainly with regards to Qatar, certainly with regards to Turkey. That's where Tom Barrack comes into play. Tom Barrack talking about the bromance between President Erdogan of Turkey and President Trump. I don't understand why there's any kind of bromance whatsoever with Erdogan, why the United States has gone out of its way to give Qatar a special protected status. There's got to be more moral clarity here about, who are the forces of good in the Middle East and who are the forces of bad in the Middle East. And unfortunately, there's a lot of forces of bad. I understand what President Trump's trying to do here. He's trying to just to limit the number of enemies that Israel has. He's trying to keep Turkey and Qatar, from moving directly over to China. But still, you see that the Qataris are doing the same thing in the schools in the United States that UNRWA is doing in Palestinian territories. If UNRWA is creating textbooks that are claiming that Israel needs to be wiped off the map and Jews need to be killed. You know the Qataris are investing in Title VI universities and in Middle East studies programs, political science programs, and hiring faculty and convincing young students that Israel is the source of all evil in the Middle East, and quite frankly, even that capitalism in America is a colonialist enterprise that needs to be replaced. So, and you really have to have complete moral clarity all up and down. If there's any inconsistencies in your moral clarity, it's going to be exposed. Moral clarity is complete. It's not, you can't hedge when it comes to moral clarity, but certainly when it comes to Israel defeating its enemies, I will say that I do believe that, President Trump has been a great ally to Israel. He's given Israel all the tools that it needs. Now, that doesn't mean that Israel's been able to do as much as fast, but what they have managed to accomplish until now is extraordinarily impressive. And the question is whether Prime Minister Netanyahu is willing to go all the way and to finish this war, and if President Trump is going to give Israel the green light to do that. I think that if Israel leaves Hamas in place, even if it's 10% of its original force power, even if Israel controls right now, as they do, 53% of the Gaza Strip. Israel has to make sure that in the coming months that Hamas doesn't exist at all, that Hamas does not control any of the territory in the Gaza Strip at all, that Hezbollah continues to be degraded. I think that it's very important for Prime Minister Netanyahu, especially if he wants to win the upcoming election, that he can turn around to the Israeli public and state that the war is completed, that Hamas, Hezbollah no longer pose a threat to Israel, not today, not in 5 years from today, not in 10 years from today.
Yeah, Alex, I wanted to take a look to the north also. You mentioned Hezbollah. Um, as we are going to air here, I saw reports of another terrorist taken out by the IDF. At the same time, rather, finance minister Vital Smotrich, who holds a position in the defense ministry as a minister there, told JNS that the IDF will likely need to intensify military operations in southern Lebanon as Hezbollah tries to recoup some of their losses and rebuild some of their terrorist infrastructure along the border. And also sticking with the north, looking at, I guess, to the northeast, this involving U.S. personnel on the ground in Syria. From what I understand, two soldiers, U.S. soldiers, and an interpreter were killed by a gunman in Syria. President Trump blamed ISIS, said this was an ISIS attack. However, further investigation revealed that the gunman was actually a member of the Syrian security forces, from what I understand, was going to be fired for extremist views. But nevertheless, he was affiliated with the Syrian security forces. We saw several weeks ago a very positive meeting between President Trump and Al Julani, president there of Syria. Yet there are elements within his regime who are not fans of normalization with the US or Israel, perhaps. And then you had this attack here in which 3 US citizens were killed in Syria. So let's just touch on Lebanon and Syria if we can.
Yeah, I mean, start with Syria. You see this, we're just talking about the moral clarity, and President Trump has chosen to put his support behind an Al Qaeda affiliated terrorist. Now, Christiane Amanpour interviewed Al Jolani at the Doha Forum last week, and, where she threw him up a softball saying, some people might say that you were affiliated with Al Qaeda, and, Jolani went on to say, this needs to be proven, and people are just saying these things. Like, listen, we know that not only was Giuliani affiliated with Al Qaeda, but even more importantly, since Giuliani has taken office, declared himself the president of Syria, that his forces have attacked the Druze, they have attacked Christians, they have attacked Alawites, they have attacked Kurds, they've killed many, many more people in Syria, even than Hamas killed on October 7th, okay? Committing absolute massacres of the political and religious minorities inside Syria. And yet the president has chose to essentially platform him, has chose to remove sanctions on Syria to give him basically control of the flow of a significant amount of funding. But there's also word that President Trump may be losing faith in Giuliani, which, quite frankly, is a surprise that he had any faith in him to begin with. I mean, there is the understanding that you do need to have a strong man in all of these territories, right? There's no way to govern, there's no way to deal with the governors of a specific territory in these failed states unless you have a strong man. So, it's hard to find a strong man that's not affiliated with terror because if you're not violent, then it's hard to be a strong man in these areas, right? So I understand that. Um, you wish there could be a different way. You see how Lebanon, you have these two strains, basically the Hezbollah strain versus the Lebanese Christian strain, and the Christians, they wish that Hezbollah wasn't a part of the territory, wasn't a part of the political equation, but they don't have the willpower to defeat these Islamic extremists, because Islamic extremists, quite frankly, are willing to fight to the last man, are willing to fight to the death, as we're seeing Hezbollah do in Lebanon, as we're seeing Hamas do in Gaza. I think that Israel is going to have to just continue to do what they've been doing in Lebanon, which is, mowing the grass. But quite frankly, the Lebanese government there should be thanking Israel for what it's doing instead of coming out against Israel for what it's doing. Now, why are they doing that? Because they don't want to be murdered by Hezbollah, right? That's why they're out there criticizing Israel. And you're seeing this all over the Middle East. The Saudis continue to talk about pathway to Palestinian statehood, even though they don't care about Palestinian statehood. Why? Because MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, doesn't want to be the next Sadat that's murdered, assassinated for normalizing with Israel. We've got to get to a situation where the leaders of these countries are slowly but surely, changing the education system and not normalizing the relations with Israel, but normalizing the idea of having normalized relations with Israel. Yeah, it has to be done inside the society. When you have government to government normalization, but you don't do anything to move your society towards peaceful recognition of Israel, then you have the cold peace that you have in Egypt. Al Sisi, he understands how important it is for his security. The same thing in Jordan. You have King Abdullah understands how important it is for his security that he works with Israel, but those two leaders have done absolutely nothing to bring their societies closer towards just mutual understanding and acceptance of the state of Israel in the region. So, on the one hand, you see President Trump, he wants these normalization agreements. You see Prime Minister Netanyahu, he wants normalization with Saudi Arabia. The president talking about wanting normalization with Lebanon, wanting normalization with Syria. On the one hand, these signatures are incredible and they have the potential for amazing things. But if you don't do the other two components, which is number one, destroying the terrorists in those countries that they can no longer reorganize and terrorize both their own societies and Israel, then normalization is not going to work. And the other thing is that it just has to be done on the social level. You have to stop the rhetoric, the anti-Israel rhetoric, and just say, "Hey, listen, guys. I know we're against Israel. We don't have to love them, but they're here. and we don't have to destroy them. Let's like just take whatever economic benefits we can get, and maybe in time we'll learn to like them a little bit better.
Alex, we're almost out of time. But one last item here. Nick Fuentes, new report came out this week saying that his rise, I guess, to popularity came from anonymous and foreign accounts. According to this report, most viral posts are heavily retweeted by foreign accounts in India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Malaysia, Indonesia, and that's where he's getting his support from. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a report from the Jewish organization Contagion. They do deep research into threats against the Jewish people, and particularly everybody knows that Israel's been absolutely destroyed, on social media since October 7th. And we've also seen the very, very rapid rise of this anti-Semitism on the right wing fringe of the Republican Party, of the MAGA movement. And I would say central to this rise is Nick Fuentes. There's others. We've talked about Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, but Nick Fuentes is the most extreme. He's truly anti-American. He's pro-Russian. He's pro-Stalin. He said Stalin is his hero on a podcast with Tucker Carlson. He said, maybe Hitler wasn't so bad. He's like openly anti-Semitic, uh, and his popularity has risen to an like immense degree, and it's hard to understand, where this is all coming from. But now you see with this Contagion report that it's artificially generated. And the question is, what are the social media platforms, including X, including TikTok, including Instagram, Facebook, what are they doing to protect the dialogue? Because you're allowing extremism to take hold because it's getting advanced through the platforms in ways that it absolutely shouldn't. And what you're seeing is that the pro-Israel content uh, is is not getting anywhere near the same kind of engagement. I think engagement is the wrong word. It's not getting the same kind of acceleration through the platforms as the anti-Israel and the anti-American content. And so this is a major, major problem. When it comes to engagement, actually, what you see is the opposite. And I was actually just this week speaking with with somebody very, very senior in TikTok, and what he said is that what they see is that the engagement on the pro-Israel at posts and actually is much greater. People spend much more time watching the pro-Israel content than watching the anti-Israel content. Why? Because it's real people supporting real content. But what the question then is, well, how come the content that's getting the most engagement, and that's really what the platforms are looking for, who's actually engaging in the content? How come that content is not flooding the algorithms? It's the opposite. So something's happening. I was told that earlier in the war, especially on TikTok, that that the people that were approving content on the platform were sitting in Dublin, Ireland. Well, guess what? If you're going to have the people approving the content sitting in Dublin, Ireland, well, Dublin is one of the most anti-Semitic hubs on the face of the earth. Okay, so of course you're going to get this anti-Israel content flooding. And I was told that a change has been made, and now the person that's doing that is sitting in the United States and is not an Israel hater like you had in Dublin. But specifically Nick Fuentes, I mean, this is somebody that should be deplatformed, not someone who should have. And what you see in this report is that the way that this acceleration takes place is that the second Fuentes would tweet something, that all of a sudden a whole flood of retweets would take place, and a lot of those retweets, many of them were in India, Pakistan, and other countries around the world. So what X has just done now in the last couple of weeks to change their policy where you could see where the account originated, that's a good move. Okay, so you could see the transparency, but something has to happen in the algorithm. Or if the algorithm sees that Nick Fuentes is being shared, retweeted in India or Pakistan, that those retweets should not have any bearing on the algorithm. To the contrary, those retweets actually should penalize that content in the algorithm. Specifically, when you see that it's like bot content, it's anonymous accounts, right? There's a lot of anonymous accounts according to the research. So good on Contagion for showing this, but let's see now if the platforms will learn the lessons of this research and actually correct the algorithms, because quite frankly, this a lot of this anti-Semitism, a lot of this anti-Americanism, it's not real. people have to wake up and realize that the majority of Americans want to support Israel, want to support America. I was just at this conference this week, as we were talking about earlier in the show, and somebody said to me, somebody really smart actually said to me, but we're so outnumbered. I said, yeah, around the world we're outnumbered because you've got close to 2 billion Muslims in the world. I said, but in the United States, we shouldn't be outnumbered. You have something like 100 million evangelical Christians, and you got over 5 million Jews in the United States, and most Americans like America, and most Americans also realize that in a fight between Israel on the one and Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, the Houthis on the other, that Israel's on the side of good and the terrorists are on the side of bad. So Israel shouldn't be in the minority in the United States. Israel should be winning this battle. But how can you win the battle when the algorithms are being clearly stacked against you? And a lot of that stacking happening with foreign influence.
Alex, whether it's Fuentes or Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran or UNRWA or those terrorists, despicable terrorists in Australia, the light of the Jewish people will not be extinguished. And that is the reason we celebrate the holiday of Hanukkah, which is will be in full swing by the time people are watching this. So I want you to end the program by giving your Hanukkah message to everyone out there who's watching the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when the story that's in Prime Minister Netanyahu's book, and it's a famous story that when he was first appointed to be ambassador to United Nations in New York, he went to Brooklyn and he met with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, of blessed memory. And when he was with him, the Rebbe told the Netanyahu that he was going into a sea of lies and darkness. And it was his job to be just a singular candle within the darkness. And I think that when we talk about like the message that we just did, about the flood of anti-Semitism on social media, which is the accelerator of information around the entire world. We see the anti-Israel rhetoric in parliaments. We see the violence against Jews, whether that's in Manchester, whether that's in Washington, D.C., where two staffers of the Israeli embassy were murdered at a Jewish event, whether that's, 10 worshipers, not worshipers, 10 celebrants gunned down at the Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia. The other two murdered there are the terrorists. That we are in a period of immense darkness. And the job of Israel, which is a tiny, tiny country, it's even shaped like a candle, is to just be that little candle. And even when you have so much darkness, you want to bring light to that darkness. Let's say that people were in a cave, okay, and there was no light, and they were in that cave for 48 hours and it was total darkness, and then somebody would come in and they would flash a floodlight beam, at the people inside the cave. What would happen? People wouldn't be able to even take the light. They would shield themselves from the light because it's too bright. But if somebody would light a candle in the dark place, that candle would be an inviting light, one that people would want to look at. In fact, the Lubavitch Rebbe in a separate teaching of Chassidut, of Torah study, stated, I think it's actually the Alter Rebbe, the first Lubavitch Rebbe, stated that the greatest increment of light is from total darkness to a single candle. And anytime you add an additional candle on that, the amount of light being added is less than that initial light. And so the story of Hanukkah is that when the temple in Jerusalem was ransacked, okay, by the Hellenist Greeks that wanted to destroy Judaism, they said, look, you can be alive, but you just can't be Jewish. That the Jewish people found on the Temple Mount a singular cod of oil, a singular jug of oil, and they lit that menorah, and they basically put a little bit of light into that darkness. And we, the Jewish people, what we celebrate is even the little candle, even the little bit of light. So even if the entire world is consumed in darkness and despair, the Jewish people, we are the ones that carry that light, that value that light, and that value life. That light to us is representative of the tree of life. Okay, the Torah is life. The Jewish people celebrate life. life and light are the celebrations of the Jewish people. We celebrate that on Hanukkah, and so I would like to bless, all of the supporters of Israel, all the Jewish people, all the lovers of good in this world, all those with moral clarity, to see the light and to spread that light, one candle at a time.
I'm into that, and I would say at the same time, let JNS be that source of light to you as well. Give us a super thanks. Donate today to JNS. Make sure you go to JNS TV for all the amazing content which JNS offers. And of course, go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. Alex, happy Hanukkah to you and yours. And looking forward to talking to you again next week.
Thanks, Josh.
Want to give a shout out to everyone behind the cameras here. Aaron Rogelantern, Zach Sickerman, our producer, Ryan Lifshitz, Esther Eden, and station manager Yuri Stretsky. Hanukkah Sameach, happy Hanukkah from Israel and from the JNS Media Hub in Jerusalem, in the eternal capital, the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Happy Hanukkah to all.